I'm not the driver of anything good that's at DaVita, but I am the mirror that gets to reflect it, and there's a lot of good things. We do now have 53,000 teammates across 51,000 across America, 52,000 across America, and 1,000 overseas. And it's an honor to be here talking to a whole bunch of kindred spirits. We consider ourselves at DaVita to be energetic participants in the movement for freedom at work, or whatever phrase you want to use, but also still very, very serious students. So we look forward to stealing ideas shamelessly from all of you. We're about, at this point, about $11 billion in revenue to go with the 53,000 people. And we're the only Fortune 400 company where the people chose the name, voted for the name DaVita. It means giving life. It wasn't picked by some consulting firm. The people chose the logo, and the people chose the core values, and I'll go on that. What we talk about, when we ask our teammates, I just met with 60 of our new teammates yesterday, for example, is asking people in organizations to reflect on what is your life purpose and what is your organization's value proposition to society outside of the products and services that you sell. That this notion that there's a zero-sum trade-off between achieving your capitalistic objectives, that there's a tension between that and also being a force for good, that's a false trade-off, that in fact it's not zero-sum, it's positive-sum. And we abhor the fact that so many adults across the world are unfortunate or insensitive to the fact that they spend more than half of their waking hours at work. And for some of us, it's way more than half, particularly if you travel. So that if you make the horrifying concession that work is not as fulfilling and fun and meaningful and filled as much with trust and caring as your life outside of work, then what a horrifying concession to make, that over half of your waking hours, 60, 70, 75% of your waking hours as an adult will be spent in an environment where you're making too much of a concession around whether or not that work fits with your life purpose. And it doesn't mean you have to do not-for-profit or charity work. It means whether or not you're in an environment where human beings interact in a way that is conducive to adding value to your life, your day-to-day life, and your community's life, while doing whatever product or service you're involved with. So we talk about that, and we believe companies can be an amazing force for good while pursuing their normal business objectives. And in fact, unless you achieve their business objectives, doing good is not sustainable. So it'd be like running a community that does not have a sustainable economy, which means all the good intentions and all the good social programs you put in place are not sustainable, because at some point you run out of money, and the good intentions lay in the ditch. We call ourselves a community first and a company second, a community that just happens to be organized as a company. So hopefully everybody in the world has experienced really intensely thoughtful and mutually caring and committed communities over time. It might be your church, might be an athletic team, might be your family, might be you and your good friends, might be a team at work. But we think that entire companies can be communities. What is the definition of a community? It's a place where people feel a sense of citizenship, which means they care about each other without relaxing performance standards. They want to get some stuff done, and they consider themselves to be stewards, that they inherited something. They also bear responsibility for what they pass down. Those are some of the common elements if you talk to people around the world about what it means to be a community. And so that type of community can exist in any number of forms. And it doesn't mean if you're a for-profit company, you don't care about profit. If you're the governor of Colorado, you care about jobs a lot. If you're the president of the United States, you care about jobs. If you're the prime minister of another country, you care about jobs. Not in and of themselves, but you know that without jobs, you can't have good schools, you can't have good parks, you can't invest in social programs, you can't invest in education, you can't invest in healthcare. So they're the means, but they're an essential means. The end is the kind of society you produce with it. Similarly for us, profit is not the end, but it's the means. And it's an essential for us to create an organization that can add value to the lives of our people. And if we do that, if we give the gift of adding value to our 53,000, then their ability to give gifts to their families, to their communities, and to each other will be dramatically enhanced. So we call ourselves the DaVita Village. My title is mayor, and unlike many mayors, I admit that I pay my voters directly. And while we've had elections on many things, we've never had an election on whether or not I get to stay mayor. So maybe someday I'll have the courage for that. It's so easy to have an excuse for not saying you're going to put a stake down and say, I want this organization, whatever it is. Let's just use a company again as an example. Try to make it a special place to work, a freedom-centered place, whatever label you want to use. So easy to say, well, the situation is not conducive to it. I'm going to wait until more things are right, or I've got the right boss, or the economy is not weak, or I get the promotion, or whatever else. There's a lot of reasons to say this is not the right time for me to make a full-throated effort to institute change. And I would submit to you that that's exactly the wrong way to think about it. If you're committed to this, the only time that you can do it, if you are committed to it, is now. And what leaders do is lead. They don't wait for the right time to lead. They're by definition not leaders at that point. There is never a right time for this because to do it in any sort of significant way requires perseverance, requires tenacity, and there's always going to be hardships along the way. This is a journey more than it's a destination. In our particular case, for example, back 14 years ago, we had maybe about 9,000 folks. When I came, we were bankrupt. If a single bank had asked for a single dollar, about half the executives had either quit because they thought the Titanic was going under, or had been fired because of the implosion of the company. We couldn't track our financial outcomes. We were being investigated by shareholders, sued by shareholders, investigated by the SEC. So it was a brutally negative place. People were angry and scared, and we decided from day one in that environment that we would try to set out and create a special place for the people who worked there, on the premise that if we did that, they would give many more gifts to the world in all its different forms, and also our patients. But it was focused on our people first. And you can imagine at that point that when I would get in front of groups like this about this size, not in as nice a room because we were bankrupt, and say, one of the things we want to do is create a special place, but about 2/3 of the room would be thinking, that's 1/3 would be saying, well, that's a really stupid thing to say because we got to make payroll. That would be special. And another third was saying that's nice and maybe he's sincere, but it's going to fade away once the realities of where we sit. And then maybe a third of the people, who knows the exact numbers, of course, said, whoa, I've always wanted to work someplace where that was one of the core objectives, to make it a meaningful place to work, not just a fun place to work, not just a decentralized place to work, not just a spirited place to work, but a meaningful place to work, a meaningful part of my life, having a meaningful impact on me and my growth, the growth of others, and the community. Boy, I hope he's serious, because that would be cool. And I'll put my oar in the water on that one because I'd like that. And then over time, through a lot of tenacity and perseverance and successes and failures, you begin to convert more and more of the room. We have a mission and values like a lot of places. Unlike a lot of places, thousands of our people know what our mission and values are. We went through about a 6-8 month process of picking the core values, debating and debating and debating, saying if, and so often it's hard, especially in an organization of some size, that a lot of people in the room will go, oh my God, KT up there is talking about this stuff. I don't think he really cares about the values. I think he cares about getting the stock price up. I think he cares about his career. He made a decision the other day to close 2 operations. That doesn't sound very village-like to me. And so part of the art of this was to go to people around tables like this and say, okay, presume for a moment that I'm sincere or incompetent, or sincere or competent or irrelevant. So take me out of it. Don't use me as an excuse. So you 6 people around the table, you talk about in a company, at that point, just America, in patient care, that's the segment we're in. You presume for a moment that the leadership actually cares about this stuff and is reasonably competent. In that world of presumption, what values would you most like to live with unusual energy in the enterprise in which you work and show up 40 to 60 hours a week? What would you like to live strongly? What would you like to have emphasized? What would you like to have honored? So it's all about you now. It's not about me and my sincerity and competence. It's about what you want made manifest in your workplace. And the debate, and that for all the cynics and skeptics puts them on call. They can't, now they suddenly have to talk about it unless they want to tell the rest of the group they don't care about that stuff. Right? Which a very small percentage do, but the fact is most people do care about that. Most human beings do want meaningful work. They do want meaningful relationships at work without relaxing performance standards. People get that. And so we engaged in that and then had an election about 8 months later that came up with the core values. And at this point, we just did a recent teammate engagement survey, and 92% of our, at this point, the people who filled out this was about a year ago, 18 months ago. So it's 34,000 out of our then 42,000 filled this out, which is a very good response rate for a highly decentralized organization like ours, and said that they believe in the mission and values. And they believe in it enough that when they think we're not acting it, we get emails calling us on violations of the mission and values. And then we had a dream, which was to build the greatest dialysis company the world had ever seen. And it turns out that a lot of folks over the course of a decade decided that this would be a cool thing to do, that if we got anywhere close to this, that would mean we're doing good things for the planet and good things for each other. And just so you don't think we're soft, so that we have a bunch of nice people who vote on values and hang around complimenting each other on their thoughtfulness. By the way, without torturing you with the specifics, if you have a relative who needs to go on dialysis, on average, you'd much rather be in a DaVita center than any other center in America and increasingly the world. And these are just our outcomes compared to others, that we are the best provider of kidney care in America. So it's not that our intentions to have a nice place to work get in the way of getting the work done for our folks. But then there's also this issue of, my gosh, if you want to be a good village for people, one of the things you have to have is a sustainable economy. You can't just have good intentions and a nice healthcare system. That's not sustainable. That doesn't work. That's going to be a nice little good thing for a short period of time, and that's not nearly as impressive as having something enduring. So it has to be competent enough to succeed. Or the metaphor I often use, it's not great to have a football team with really nice people who care about each other and lose all their games. That's because they are, in the end, a football team. They're supposed to win some games. And so just quickly, we used to be smaller, and now we are bigger. We used to lose money, that's the red, and now we make money, that's over there. And stock used to be lower, and now it's higher. So we don't lose our football games at the same time as working on these other things. Also, people might say, well, yeah, I believe in this stuff, but I can't do it for some structural reason. We have too many high-paid, up-and-out, highly ambitious people in my enterprise. It's a professional service firm, or we have too many people who haven't been to college and blah, blah, blah. Or because they're running a factory, we can't have the right conversations. Or because a lot of people in the sales force and they're bopping around and not around it. Yeah, everybody can have some excuse for why, my gosh, the architecture of our environment is too big an obstacle to actually pull this off. And I would submit that our experience says that that's just not true if you bring the right energy to it, because we have now 2,000 small locations across America, each with about 25 folks. And because we take care of dialysis patients, that's 6 days a week, 3 shifts a day. So even in one of those locations, you can't get everyone together at the same time because they work different days and shifts. Many of them have second jobs. You cannot call them together. And even if they did ever happen to be there, you couldn't call them together because some of them have to stay with the patients. You can never leave all the patients alone. And so you can't call a meeting at 4:30 in the morning and get all the people who work the evening shift to show up there. You can't get the people on Saturdays to come in on Thursdays. So it is almost impossible in one location to get everyone together, except for a very rare summer picnic or a Saturday evening dinner, but nothing else, much less multiple centers anywhere. And with people on dialysis, you never shut down. It's 6 days a week forever because those patients need to clean their kidneys regularly. And so we would submit that in terms of structural obstacles, our environment was reasonably tough. So we had to sit down. The beauty, what seemed like a burden, turned out to be a gift. Because if it had been easy, if we had 1,000 people or 3,000 people in one building, and they were all sort of white-collar, homogeneous, and a lot of them were in town a lot, you say, whoa, we might have been too confident that we could pull that off because it would have been so easy to create relationships and familiarity and get people together and do programs and stuff like this. But because we knew we had the opposite, we had these thousands and early on of angry, disillusioned people across America, and we could never even get them out on the phone at the same time, unless again you called a Sunday call and asked everybody to tee in for that. That we had to become much more creative about how we were going to try to do this in an authentic way, and so that you'd end up X years later with 92% of the people saying that they believe in it. And so we went through all the points, sort of the analytical points one might do if you're launching a new product or launching a new business. And we would get in the room and have meetings and say, okay, if we are going to try to create a distinctively healthy culture for human beings, if we're going to do that, what should we start doing differently tomorrow? Just what the next day and what dimensions of what we do should we affect? And we'd spend time and come up with very detailed plans, just as if we were rolling out a new automobile or something. And so we talked about how we recruit, how we review, what we revere, how we reward, how we reinforce, and then we would do reality checks. And let me sort of pop through each. So from a recruiting point of view, it's amazing to me the number of CEOs who say, you know, our people are our most important asset and our values are important. And then you look at their interview process, and they don't interview for their core values. So for us, and of course that's never true, because we have centers where the mission and values don't live strongly, but for on the forms, and in a high percentage of cases, every single person, whether you're an assistant in Arkansas, a patient care tech in New York, or a senior vice president in Denver, you get evaluated according to the core values as part of the process. And the beauty of that is the person doing the interviewing is also reminded to think about it and to think about the candidate, and much more likely to actually talk about them with the candidate, which then makes those candidates who are more attuned and interested in this sort of thing actually resonate in a way that affects the outcome of the interview and the probability that they accept. And so it's a very powerful reinforcing circle. Every single senior executive that's been hired in the last 14 years is evaluated according to the mission and values. You will never come to a DaVita conversation after an interview that has 3 or 4 people who interviewed someone in the course of the day, and when you're talking about the candidate, where in the first 3 sentences it isn't commented on as to whether or not the person's an M&V fit, mission and values fit, strong, medium, would never happen at this point. And this was a CFO candidate many years ago. KT is me, Joe Mello was the chief operating officer, and Gary Bile was a controller. And you can see we rate the person on each of the core values as well as an aggregate. You can see the CFO candidate was no fun. He had 2s, and it turns out it's very hard to find a fun CFO candidate. Maybe it's not good to have a fun CFO, I don't know. And we did not hire this gentleman, that's why we don't put his real name up. But he was no fun. So that's it, and then on to the review process. And we get very intense about this, starting with me. So every year I get scored by the 20 or so people who work most closely with me on each component of the mission and the core values. And my scores get shown to the board of directors, and they get shown to, over the course of the year, probably 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 of our DaVita Village citizens. And so that when I'm going astray, it is public. And there's there are written comments along with the scores. And so it forces me to confront whether or not I think I am, and whether or not people are experiencing me as doing my best in these areas. And then the entire village gets scored as well. And you can see here how we came out recently. The top is strongly agree that service excellence, that we strive to live our core value of service excellence DaVita. Then the green is agree. Then there's neutral and disagree, and strongly disagree is at the bottom, unfortunately, and it's hard to see because it's small. And so everybody sees the village scores. So this is how 34,000 human beings rated us on our core values. Each local team also rates itself. And so it can compare how, you 25 people who work in a center in Dallas, Texas, think you guys are living the mission and core values together, and compare it to your division, compare it to the overall village, compare it to the CEO, and then we distribute kits for people to help them facilitate, because we can't send professional facilitators around to 2,000 locations. We don't have nearly the money for that. So we give people kits to facilitate, so that team can get together in different subsets and say, hey, here's where our 2 highest scores, let's kind of savor that. Here's our lowest score, let's talk about that. Here's how we compare to other folks, and create a real dialogue. Because if you don't talk about the values, then how can you expect to move an environment along with respect to them? Which is not to say there are some moments of awkwardness and this and that, but in the end, who said it was going to be easy? And to somehow think it's just going to happen that we're going to have 2,500 distributed leaders with perfect charisma and perfect ability to motivate their group towards the core values is a joke. That's a logical joke. The people in the end, you have to have the entire population become more thoughtful, to start to own more, talk about more, interact more on this topic, or you end up regressing to the mean like most significantly sized organizations. That you got to create a movement. This is not a management technique. It's not a program. It's not a speech. It's not, the leader's important, but it can't be leader-led because that's doomed when you want to do it in a scaled, geographically distributed way. In the end, you have to create the momentum. You have to create the tidal shift. You have to create the engagement. You have to create the language. Otherwise, it cannot happen. And so we work hard to do that, and they have. And when it comes to the core values, one of the big insights, too, is that some people look at these, especially in a lot of for-profit companies, and say, well, it's motherhood and apple pie. I say, well, yeah, that's right. Just about everybody believes. I mean, our core values are service, excellence, integrity, team, continuous improvement, accountability, fulfillment, and fun. And not a lot of people are going to vote against those. There's not a lot of people who get up in the morning and say, today I'm going to go out and destroy integrity. Today I want to go really hurt the team. Today if I see any fulfillment, I'm going to vomit. People don't do that. They don't go out intending to do that, but every day some people do it. Every day some of the rest of us create environments that provoke them to do it. So values are not about believing in them. Values are about practice. Values are about practice, and that's hard. It's our individual practice as to how robustly did we not just, and values are a matter of not violating, right? Integrity does not equal not lying. Not lying is not integrity. Not destroying fulfillment is not the same as living a fulfilled life. Not being anti-team is the same as living the core value of team. In the end, practicing the core values, living the core values is by its very essence necessarily a proactive, a vital, vibrant, outgoing type of activity, which then affects the entire environment. This is one of those things where a rising tide carries all boats, but only the boats can start to provoke a rise in the tide. And then these are my core values from the last year. The words that are used on mine are different: outstanding, strong, solid, and then needs work, and the fifth one should be shot or something like that. And some of you are going to look and say, well, you'd probably get much better scores, but these, don't say that out loud because it'll hurt my feelings, because these are my best scores after 12 years, so don't chuckle at them. This is the first time ever I didn't have any negatives in any of the categories. They were all 5s, 4s, and 3s. It took me over a decade, but I found out who was giving me the low scores, and I fired them. So there's some derivative value to these surveys. Please understand that was a joke. I did not fire the people. I just cut their pay. And then in every professional development review, the first section that I do, the first section is most important message, and the second section I go through each of the 3 components of the mission and every core value. This is a real one from one of the folks that reported to me. And so I actually talk with somebody, and you don't say to someone, Tammy, you are low integrity. It's not, no, Tammy, other people experience you as not living our core value of activity. So Tammy, if you want to think everybody else is wrong, you can do that, and maybe you're right, but we still have this reality that everybody experiences you as low integrity, or people experience you as not being very team oriented, and yes, it gets uncomfortable. Well, cool, but that's kind of the whole point, right? Because we all know that sometimes some of us underperform in these ways, or create environments where everybody's underperforming in some of these ways. And if you are not going to go through some uncomfortable conversations, how in the heck do you ever think you create a discontinuity on that? Not just with cheerleading. This is about human reflection. This is about when people are underperforming in a value, they usually have a reason for it. They're doing it because somebody was mean to them, or somebody was unfair to them, or because they're tired, or because their teenager's in trouble, or their marriage is in trouble, or they have a substance abuse problem, or they feel overworked, or they're failing at work, or whatever. There's a reason they're doing it. Right? And so unless you start to talk about this stuff so that collectively you go through how each of you are affecting each other and the reality that each of you face, it's very hard to start positing that you're going to move the dial on living the values. Just announcing them doesn't do it. It does for a little while. There's a certain buzz effect. But there's a very short half-life to the notion of sort of the magic moment of voting and announcing and discussing. And then you get, it's kind of the beauties of a marriage. And then, staying married, that takes work. That takes work. Not every day is a honeymoon. And so we talk about it. And for a lot of, I'm 57 now. I can tell you, a lot of 50-year-old executives who bring in from the outside, it's been a long time since someone has ever told them how other people experience them with respect to core values, like maybe ever. And so it's pretty intense. But that's sort of the idea, right? Because this is an intense goal. And so the notion of getting to an intense goal in a mellow, easy way is a discontinuity of logic that is amazing, but it's implicit in many work environments. This is hard stuff. You don't climb a mountain accidentally. You want to create a distinctive place, especially at scale. Then you got to fasten your seatbelt and know that you're going to be working hard for some time. And particularly because then you get people like me who talk about this and then go screw up in some way, and 1,000 people go, aha, you know, that means team is not a core value because KT just did something that I think violated the core value of team. And so you got to process through all that. And you got to get into a world where people will bring up when they think KT violated a core value. So you get to talk about it. And half the time, they find out that no, you know, closing those 2 centers was not a violation of the concept of our mission or our village, because keeping the village alive is job 1 for the mayor. So half the time, they're going to find out that, in fact, it was consistent with our values. But absent a discussion, they wouldn't have known. They just would have said, ah, see, it's just words on a banner. And half the time, they're right. And I did violate a core value. Or if not violated, didn't live strongly. But in some cases, just violated. Violated the core value of accountability. Then they got to hear me say, you know what? I got this email, and they're right. I did. I violated the core value. I am sorry. I'm working on that. You know, none of us get it right every day, and a lot of people get it right more often than me. Often it's in the breach of these core values that they are most honored if the leadership, which can be at any position, because leadership is not a function of title, it's a function of behavior. Moral leadership, life leadership, values leadership is not a function of position, it's a function of behavior. And the behavior of taking accountability for when you violate individually or institutionally a core value, again, either violate blatantly or fail to live in a robust way that makes you proud to live it, those are in fact the moments when you get the most people to pay attention and say, holy Moses, we're serious about this. We're not pretending that it's all positive. And then reward. We believe that a community will produce most what it honors most. So if you honor profit the most, then you're going to get a lot of profit, but not much else. So we do not honor profit at DaVita. We reward profit. Those people that are really good at business, we give them bigger bonuses. We give them equity awards. We love those people because they fund our village. So that's like being a great basketball player. We reward that. We don't honor it. There's nothing honorable about picking up big market share, driving up margins. That's impressive and deserves being rewarded as long as it's done ethically. But being honored is when you exercise significantly differentiated human behavior and impact on the world. And so that's what we honor. One of the most special nights of the year in the life of our village, the Village Night of Honor.
This is for everyone back in Napa. Without all of them, this wouldn't be possible. One for all and all for one.
I'm true blue DaVita. My husband said when we turned our bedroom to blue and yellow that I had kind of gone a little over the top.
I'll definitely hang this proudly in my facility. Thank you.
After having been in dialysis for 28 years, we've truly found a home and a family with DaVita.
Thank you, DaVita, for being the kind of company that allows me to grow both personally and professionally.
At the help desk, we don't have a way of touching the patients. We have to do that for you guys. And the least I can do is thank everybody in this room that does that.
And I'm so proud to now be a part of DaVita. I've never ever experienced anything like this. It's absolutely amazing. Thank you. Thank you.
So that ceremony takes place once a year in a very serious way. In January, I send out a message, and our Chief Wisdom Officer sends out a message to the top 200 executives for nominations for core value awards. This year we got about 84 of them. And one of the things I say to our executive group is that if any of you haven't nominated someone else for a couple of years, then how much do you actually believe in them? because we know there's some people who differentially live them. And if you can't allocate the time every year or two to writing a serious nomination, because you do have to provide examples and a narrative and things, then you got to go look in the mirror and really assess whether or not you believe in these things. So we got about 84 this year, and then at our annual executive retreat with those 200 people or so, there's about 20 of us that go off for a few hours the first night and look at the vote tallies and the comments and narrow it down. And then there's 4 of us who make the final decisions the second night, a couple more hours. And then there's nominating speeches created, and then at that dinner you find people being awarded a core value for noble human behavior. And then their names are put up for the rest of time near the mayor's office as well as elsewhere. And so every year you see who were the people that were honored for being role models for our core values. And then we also do a video, so it goes home. And so if you're a mommy or a daddy, you can show your kids. You know, they say, Mommy's talked about the importance of being a good team player for a long time. Mommy just got a core value award for this, and here's the speech talking about why Mommy got this. And so Mommy doesn't just talk about it, she lives it. And then in a less formal way, we do it throughout the village. So 3 years in a row, we've had the good fortune to have enough money to take the village out to dinner. So this past year, we had 37,000 people across America out to dinner, theoretically one night. It didn't all happen on one night. And there's a video that talks about the success of the prior year and our mission and our values. And then at every one of those dinners, there's a couple of core values given with the spouses and significant others in attendance. So everybody experiences on that localized basis across a couple thousand places in America the significance that we attach to those people who face all the same pressures of budgets and family finances and aging parents, and nonetheless are role models for the rest of us. And then moving on to reward, we do something that we don't know. I've been saying this for a few years, but I don't know of any other organization that does, which is if you're a manager at DaVita, the last 6 years, let's say you have 20 people working for you, we'll say you can pick 5, 1 out of every 4, who differentially live our mission and values, no difference in business performance assumed, and give them what's called a value award. And so they get, we used to do this privately, and then our people voted to make it public. We were worried originally that the elections had become too political, and so we just let the FAs pick and kept it private, the local managers, I should say. And I get a letter, and the last couple of years been anywhere from a $600 to $1,000 or $1,200 check. And for a lot of our folks, we have a lot of patient care techs who make $15 an hour. It's as much as we have, our Medicare reimbursement level is set. Is very meaningful money in addition to a very meaningful message. And as I said, our managers then voted to make the announcements public the last couple of years, and so we switched, and the whole team gets to see who is being honored in this way. And then reinforcement ends up being a big deal because just like people who go to church, you can kind of get numb. You go to church every Saturday or Sunday, and you hear the same sermon every 52 weeks. It's the same one, and all the rest, and it can become a little numb. And so part of the art of this is trying to keep things fresh. There's a wonderful Buddhist saying, it is easy to be mindful, it's hard to remember to be mindful. So part of the art of this, especially when it's most important to be mindful, is reminding in refreshing ways and provoking reflection. So we work hard on that. We do things like the Voice of the Village call every 8 weeks. For years and years, we invite everybody to get on the phone. Now, because of the realities of our operating environment with people being hands-on with patients, typically about 2,500 to 3,000 folks will be on the phone. And we give a little update on what's going on. We tell some story that has to do about our village or our mission or our values every call. And then there's Q&A. And also teammates can throw out DaVita moments where they feel the mission or values have lived strongly, or they can ask a question or make a comment critical of CEO compensation or whatever they want, and everybody gets to hear the questions and the answers. Are the answers honest? Are they straightforward? Are they thoughtful? Do they demonstrate compassion or none of the above? And so despite our decentralized nature, it makes it feel much, much, much smaller. We also start every annual State of the Village address with the senior team's underperformance, those areas in which we have underperformed in the prior year. We also do the academies, maybe one other example, which Tracy referred to. The academies, we invite every single teammate who joins us across America, and now we're figuring out how to do it internationally, but we're spread across 9 countries, to a 2-day session. And for many of our people, they've never been on an airplane, they don't have a credit card, they've never checked into a hotel. They had 2 days at hotels like this because they have to have the right facilities, and there's no applied training. It's about our mission, our values, our language, and we ask them to reflect on their life purpose, write stuff down about it, and see what is the overlap between their life purpose and working with us or not. And it's a beautiful, beautiful gift. And what we say is that we want you to become citizens of the village. In the end, does it really matter whether I call you an employee or teammate or a citizen? No. No, I call our folks teammates or citizens. What matters is what they call themselves. Do they consider themselves to be an employee or a teammate or fully a citizen? And we say, well, we can't ask someone to proactively and assertively and robustly become a citizen unless we share sufficient information with them. You can't do that with a country, you can't do that with a company. And so we say that the Academy is our massive investment in giving them enough information and enough opportunity to talk such that they can make X months later an informed decision of whether or not they declare themselves to be a citizen with all the rights and responsibilities associated therewith. And that's the pivotal moment. We call it crossing the bridge. We also have other ways of reinforcing our mission values.
Yo, DaVita! Yo, DaVita! It's so good to get out of that CEO costume and back in my regular clothes. No brag!
We said we did, no brag.
What is this company? Whose company is it? And what could it be? Damn straight. Dream team, we are here! One for all! But if we must dialyze, let it be like this, one for all! Oh! One for all! Damn straight, go out and have fun.
Okay, so some people lose it when we show that stuff. And I talk to rooms full of CEOs, and they say, some of this stuff's pretty interesting, thought-provoking, I'm going to take an idea or two home. And then I put that up, and our eyes go up in their heads, and they say, this is weird, this is cheesy, this is bizarre, I would never be caught dead doing that stuff. And so after a few years, for a while, we took our call and response stuff out because we would lose the audiences. And it took a couple of years for me to figure out why this sort of stuff emerged in the DaVita Village. And we put it back in because I figured out how to explain it. Because for, again, most groups, particularly CEOs and senior executives of significant companies, that just really makes them uncomfortable. And I say, okay, many of you go to sporting events. And many executives go to sporting events, and they'll wear a different uniform, and they'll do call and response, they'll do the wave, and they do it to create positive energy and enthusiasm. A lot of adults do it, not self-conscious. A lot of adults have been in the military or are still in the reserves or have relatives who are. Or they wear different uniforms, they do call and response, they sing songs together. It's to remind themselves of their shared dedication to their mission and their loyalty to each other. A bunch of people have done that, have relatives who have done that. Not self-conscious, not cheesy. Then look at religion. Virtually every religion, different uniform, you do call and response, you sing together as a way of reminding yourself of your shared spirituality in a powerful group-oriented way. Lots of adults do that stuff. Some of you do it. So it turns out there's nothing sophomoric or ridiculous or bizarre about those kinds of behaviors. It's only inappropriate if you're a morally sterile corporation. If you're in fact a community with a soul, then those are entirely natural actions where people feel very comfortable. And so we do that stuff all the time for those reasons, because we don't want to concede anything in terms of enthusiasm to a sporting event. We don't want to concede anything in terms of dedication to our mission and loyalty to each other, to the military. And we don't want to concede anything to religion in terms of respecting people's shared sense of spirituality day to day, whatever that definition of spirituality is. We don't want to concede anything in those regards. The next thing that's so important is to let teammates speak. You don't know what your real values are of your organization until the executives get off the stage and the people talk about how they experience the values being lived day to day or not. That's when you reach the next level as an organization. And no one better to respond to a teammate, a mid-level teammate who thinks the values are a bunch of superficial crap than another teammate in the same job with the same pay in the same area who says, I experience it very differently. That's when you get the real dialogue in both directions, as opposed to when it's someone like me yapping. And we do a bunch of other stuff to make sure that our people get to speak a lot and vote a lot. And then when we do our annual meeting, expensive meeting, 4,000 people, we were just together, we stop the meeting for a while and have everyone do their own mission and values report card. So you just sit with yourself in a way that often in life people don't do enough. And so we stop the meeting despite having spent all that airfare and say, okay, now each of you evaluate yourself, how you think you're doing and how you think other people experience you. What grade do you give yourself with respect to each of these core values? And it's very, very powerful stuff for many of us. And then we say, go ahead and talk about it if you'd like with the person on your left, the person on your right, your high score, your low score, whatever. Because if we don't talk about it, if we don't reflect on it with rigor, how in the heck do you ever think that you're going to become distinctive at it and have an entire organization be that way? It sort of relates to we talked about the 360 before with me. One of the things I did, because if you're CEO for a while, at some point, you can absorb some negative feedback and sort of take it in stride and say, well, people don't understand what it's like to have my job, and they would mess up in this way too if they were me. And so I, a couple times, took my 360 home and had my parents see it and my kids. And that was really humbling to show my mom and dad what some people experienced as my negative attributes at work, and my kids. And my daughter, Christina, was about 13. She's 23 now, but 13 at the time I remember. I gave her the 360. She went upstairs to her bedroom, came back down a while later and said, well, Daddy, I read your 320. She didn't get the number right. And I said, well, good, Chrissy, what'd you think? And I was hoping she'd focus on some of the positive things, the fat chance. She goes, Daddy, you tell Matthew and I, Matthew's her brother, you tell Matt and I that if we do our best, that's what's important. That's sort of the big thing. Do your best. But in here, a lot of people say that when they disappoint you, even if they've done their best, that you get angry at them. So that's against what you tell us, Dad. Why do you do that? So I'm sitting there regretting the fact I gave her the darn thing, and my jaw kind of drops, and I said, well, Chrissy, Daddy just hasn't grown up enough yet in that way. And she's just totally puzzled because Daddy, you're older than the hills, and my understanding is you run the company. Why would they let you run it if you still mess up in that way? And I said, well, Chrissy, I'm working on it. I'm working on it. And it was really tougher for me to get that feedback from my daughter or have her see that than it was to hear it from the executives who work for me. And then it also led for a while, it was much easier to have conversations with my daughter about report cards because, as opposed to this world where, she sort of assumed that Mom and Daddy always got A's and therefore were being critical of her. She knew now that Daddy didn't have all A's and wasn't as defensive when talking about when she didn't, because it wasn't as if I was coming from another planet and being critical of her. I talked about academies before. And then the other step that we took, when I say we, the people, is people started to say, okay, if we're a community, we should do more things that communities do. that many companies wouldn't, but communities do. And so we started programs like scholarships for kids and grandkids of our teammates with certain criteria, where we do village service days, service to our communities, where we volunteer hours and provide money for supplies and things, where we do medical missions overseas, taking kidney care to people who previously died, where we'd facilitate campaigns to have thousands of thank you letters sent to physicians who otherwise rarely get them and are so touched when they do. That we set up a process for having patients honor our caregivers. Again, giving the gift of honor and respect, which is a gift to both the giver and the receiver. That we set up volunteer greeter programs where we had volunteers in our centers to help people get out of cars and sit with the spouse when they're waiting. So suddenly, we now have this beautiful portfolio of about 30 programs that all started with people getting around a table and saying, okay, what does a healthy community do? So forget the business for a moment. What kind of things does a healthy community do in order to add value to the world and to each other? And let's do more of those things, taking advantage of the administrative infrastructure that we have. And we now have this beautiful trilogy of care, caring for our patients, not only clinically, but with compassion and friendliness, caring for each other with the same intensity with which we care for our patients, and caring for our world. And we have about 30 programs now, all of them coming from ideas from our people. Some succeeded and grew, some we had to prune, but still have about 30, where hundreds and hundreds of good things happen throughout the DaVita Village every year, actually thousands at this point, without any new programs, without any new effort. It's automatically set up in the same way a healthy community has rituals like 4th of July and Hanukkah and birthdays and things like that, where we force reflection and create a mechanism for doing good on a regular basis. That's what healthy cultures and societies do in order to sustain themselves, and that's what we've done. And then we regularly, I already mentioned the statistic, invite outsiders to come in, like WorldBlu, like others, just to see if we're falling into the pattern of believing in our own rhetoric and checking whether or not the reality matches it in a reasonable percentage of time. And so this is our way of staying rigorous. So for us, it's just so important, like for you in this group, talking with kindred spirits, it's not a program, it's a way of life. And what we say is, while we do business, we're not about business. We're about life, starting with the lives of the people with whom we work. That is what we're about. And the business is the means of creating a robust and more fulfilling life for the people with whom we work. And if we do that, then they'll do that for their families and for their communities. And we've kept three principles in mind for a long time. First, don't know who coined these words. This is not a dress rehearsal. This is your life. It's easy rushing to forget that and really reflect on what you most want to look back on in 10, 20, 30 years. The second, from a point of view of building a freedom-centered workforce, beginning with the end in mind. If you don't have a pretty clear picture as to what that looks like, as opposed to just the concept, you'd probably never get there, because it's hard. If you're not there already and you want to get there in a distinctive way, you got to have a plan. You got to monitor it. You got to persevere. You got to be ready to have failures. But if you don't have a pretty clear picture of what it means and what it takes to climb the mountain, you're probably only going to get a third of the way up and then give up because you're on the wrong path. It's too cold. You're too tired. You're too hungry. And then it's so important when it comes to this sort of concept of freedom-centered workplaces. It's for the leadership, and again, leadership can come from any level, is to speak with your life, not just your words. There's that old saying that what you're doing speaks so loudly, I can't hear a word you're saying. And Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist nun, had that right. And the time is now. For many of you, you passed this, you had this epiphany long ago and are leading the way, and that's why you're here. And for us, when we talk to other organizations, we say that no better time than today to go off, reflect a little bit, and decide if you're going to cross the bridge or not, and make this end of creating a different type of workplace, and therefore creating different types of lives for those people who will then have different types of impact on the world. No time better than today to confront whether or not you're crossing the bridge and going to be committed to doing that in a lasting, relentless kind of way. Thank you very much.